Hi everyone and welcome to this week's show of the Aspie Whisperer, where we talk everything Aspie. This week's show is all about dual diagnosis and what those impacts look like. We've also got a fantastic inside word from a parent, as well as our normal segments of Aspie News, Tip of the Week, Set the Scene, and of course not forgetting Mike Unleashed.
Shh.
On this week's show, we're talking about dual diagnosis and ASD and what that means for those individuals who have more than one diagnosis. Dual diagnosis can often be called a co-morbid diagnosis and or a cluster diagnosis, depending on how many additional diagnoses the individual has. Now, this doesn't matter whether you are a level 1 or a level 3 with ASD. So level 1 means that you need less supports, and a level 3 means that you need more support. So when we're looking at that dual diagnosis and how it impacts, we also need to have a look at, is it a cognitive impact? Is it an emotional impact, behaviour, speech? Is it to do with the way that the person is processing the situation? So we need to look at how each diagnosis and what deficits they bring and how that impacts the individual. And then we need to sort of group those together and look at the best way that we're going to teach things to that individual. I know for people that I've worked with, we often see a lot of dual diagnosis in young girls with ASD that also have eating disorders. And we tend to have a look at, we look at eating disorders and we think, okay, so, it is a control thing. But a lot of the time it comes underneath that and it looks at the ASD thinking and how that person processes information, how they, have a cognitive view around what is actually going on, their understanding about things. A lot of it's linked to social sides and that feeling of rejection or feeling different to their peer groups. So it's having a look at how that really impacts on that individual, and then where do we need to start supporting that individual under that side with their thinking to actually support them with their eating disorder as well. So, that dual diagnosis impacts can be huge. So along with, we see eating disorders, we're also talking about there are other dual diagnoses of oppositional defiance disorder. And I can remember working with a young guy who, he was about 12. No, he wasn't. He was about 11 about 11 at the time, I think, when I first came on board. And, his diagnosis was ASD. He was a level 1. And he also had ODD, so oppositional defiance disorder. And there was a real impact around putting on his shoes. So every morning before going to school, there was this huge impact around getting dressed, getting his shoes on, mum sort of asking him to do it, him just turning around, nope, I'm not doing it, shutting down. And it turned out that it was actually more of a sensory issue. So it was to do with his cognitive motions with doing up his shoelaces, the feel of holding the shoelaces and trying to organise to tie them properly. And once we sort of looked at that and worked that out, and we changed the shoelaces for those stretchy band laces where you just plug one side in each of the holes and they turn the shoes into a slip-on shoe, that behaviour actually went away, which was fantastic. So it wasn't actually the oppositional side for him. It was actually more to do with his ASD and his sensory side. And once we had sort of given him skills and strategies around that, that behaviour disappeared. So, when I talk about the dual diagnosis and I'm talking about supporting the individual, we need to look underneath and we need to look at how that actually impacts them from both sides of the diagnosis. So the word on the street is, in this week's Aspie News, the kids are going back to school. So the relaxation of the restrictions around COVID-19 mean that kids in Victoria and around the world are heading back into the school campus. What is that going to look like and what challenges is that going to bring for us? Well, we have to look at how our child is viewing this transition. So sitting down having a chat with our kids about what is this going to look like for them? What are their fears and what are they excited about? Remembering that a lot of our kids are going to feel overwhelmed. It's a whole new routine again. Many kids have been sleeping in later or not in that same routine that they would have had before. So we've got an adjustment period that we have to go through. We need to look at, for that individual, what this adjustment period is going to look like. So for them, is it already starting to get into that routine of getting up and getting ready for school, as well as what it's going to look like when they're in the school grounds. So for kids who are used to being walked into school, that's no longer going to happen. We have to learn to leave them at the gate. We also need to make a plan. So my advice to you right now would be to sit down with your individual family member, talk about their plan, what we're going to put in place to help this transition as smooth as possible. We need to look at the transition strategies that we've used in the past at work, and then we need to add new ones to that to help to, I guess, individualise it to this situation for them. Communication in this is the key. Hearing from them what they are really excited about is really important, because that will help them to push through those barriers. We also need to have a look at, for them, that downtime that they're going to need after having that increased stimuli. So what's our plan for when they get home from school? Talking to the schools, do we need to adjust their individual learning plans? Maybe some kids are going to need a timetable adjustment, or they might need to have a bit of an adjustment on a staggered re-entry to school. So sitting down and seeing what your kids need, and then talking to the schools and the teachers and setting that up and working collaboratively to make this as a smooth transition as possible. Good luck. Welcome to the Inside Word, and our guest today is Tania. Hi Tania, how are you?
Hey Trudy, good.
That's good, and thank you for joining us today. Our show today is on dual diagnosis, and my understanding is you've got family members that also have autism and a dual diagnosis.
I do. I have one son and I have one daughter, and they both have ASD plus a variety of other flavours to their character and personality.
So there's quite a cluster in there.
There is. So my son is predominantly ASD, but he also was diagnosed with OCD and ODD, which I wasn't aware of what that was initially, so I learned a lot about oppositional defiant disorder.
Yep.
And my daughter was predominantly diagnosed with ASD, but she also has OCD and she has Tourette's, which is a recent thing.
Yep.
So she was diagnosed about 15 years ago. It's only probably the last few years that she's developed the Tourette's, and she has an intellectual disability as well.
So you've really got a lot going on in your household.
I have the spectrum.
I love it. I absolutely love it. So how did having a dual diagnosis, or in your case the cluster diagnosis, impact on the way that you interacted with your children?
It's really hard because each one has its own set of characteristics that you need to be able to adapt and help them with, and they don't often complement each other.
Yeah.
So with an Aspie, obviously, you've got certain ways that you need to interact with them, but when they've got oppositional defiant disorder, it's a completely different ballgame. So, and as you know, with the spectrum, there's so many different various traits that you'll have when you're on the autism spectrum, but then to have all these other things thrown into the mix really make it complex in how, and I have found that I actually have to deal with each one individually.
Yes.
I don't deal with it. I do deal with it holistically in one respect, but I don't clump them all together and say, right, we're dealing this way. I've got to be able to look at each one individually and work accordingly.
And adapt. And I guess it's having a look at seeing which one's coming through at that time and which way they're going to process and respond best to the interaction that you put in place.
Correct. And it's funny actually, because I quite often have said about my son, I wonder who I get today. Is it Dr. Jekyll or is it Mr. Hyde? Because depending on what mood he's in, he can be the sweetest angel.
Yeah.
Or completely the devil incarnate. I say that with love. Obviously, he's not a devil.
Yep.
But the characteristics, he could go off the nuppy.
Yeah.
And then other times he can be the most beautiful, gentle soul, depending on what part is coming out that day.
And I guess I want to take you to your daughter with the Tourette's as well. You said that only came out a couple of years ago?
Yes, that was an interesting one because she's echolalic, so she repeats everything that she hears, and we know that she's got the OCD, but we all of a sudden started getting the verbal and the physical tics.
Yep.
With the head jerking and almost like barking like a seal and things like that. So, and as anxiety kicks in,
yep,
they become even more pronounced. But because she is so severely autistic and has an intellectual disability, she speaks a little bit, but she doesn't really have a way to verbalise her anxiety levels and things like that. So we can see when her anxiety levels go up by the increased tic activity.
Yeah.
And happens with all the other things that go.
So it becomes more animated.
Absolutely.
So I guess for her too, with having the E. coli and the reduced verbal, was it like for you? Was it kind of like trying to figure out whether it was an auditory processing part in that as well?
It was hard to really figure out where the Tourette's came from because that, as I said, it's been a fairly recent thing. But trying to understand, not realising or understanding where her anxiety comes from.
Yeah.
Because she's unable to verbalise that part of it.
Yes.
That's the hard thing. It's trying to diagnose something when you've got a hand over your eyes and a hand over your ears and trying to figure it out.
Really hard. Really, really hard. So for you as a mum, and having, I guess, one with level 3 support needs and one with level 1 support needs, how do you balance that?
With great care and laughter and happiness. People always ask me the same question. They always say to me, why are you so happy? You've got this weight on your shoulders, you've got all these things going on. Why are you so happy all the time? It's because I choose to.
Yeah.
I choose to see the cup half full. I choose to see the light in the life of my kids. I choose to say, well, the goalposts are here, not here, so let's work with what we've got.
Yep.
I do the best I can, but I am kind to myself and I'm gentle to myself. And I learned very recently through a new support group that I've been involved with that if I don't put myself first, then I actually put everybody last.
Yes.
And the best analogy that they gave me is if someone asked you the question, Trudy, would you rather give your family a watered out 50% half version of yourself or a brightly coloured, animated, happy 100% version of yourself? Which one would you choose?
Definitely brightly coloured.
So why don't we do that? So I learned I need to put myself first and look after myself so I can actually cope with all the children's diagnoses and help them. But in helping myself, I actually help them far more than if I did it the other way around.
Oh, definitely. You're an inspiration, Tania. You really are, because, we all have a journey and we all have battles, independent battles that we face and challenges that we face. But I think also when we look at what somebody else goes through, it helps us to see as well where we're lucky. Do you know what I mean? And I don't mean that in a derogative way at all, but, we all sometimes look at the wall and go, I just can't do it anymore. And then we look past that.
I have days where I cry.
Yep.
And I have days when I don't. And I don't wallow, but I allow myself to feel those feelings and have those days on occasion.
Yeah.
And then pick myself up and move forward after that.
And I think...
You can't deny what you feel.
Exactly. I think that's very true. And I say to a lot of parents that I work with as well, it's, a lot of times parents have grief. And that's okay. We don't need to have guilt, but we do grieve. And we grieve not just once, but often through the lifetime as they grow and we change, and that's okay for us to do that.
I think I learned that when I saw my sister actually had a child quite late in life, and as her age, when she was a baby, there wasn't, it wasn't that much of a thing, but as her daughter got older and then she suddenly became equal to the intellectual level of my daughter, and then started to surpass her and do the things because she's a normal neurotypical child, I went through lots of grief.
Yeah.
Because I could actually see more what I was missing out or what I thought I was missing out. I wasn't going to do the mother-daughter things that other people do. I wasn't going to get to do the school formals and boys and makeup and all that sort of stuff. So I so agree with you. You go through different grief times and different, but then I look at the other side, I look at the cup half full and say, she goes to bed at the same time as every night. She never ups to
There's a bit of an upside there, isn't there? Like, let's look at the real good positives that come out of things.
That's the positives there I can, let me tell you.
Definitely. It has been an absolute pleasure talking to you today. Before I let you go, I'd just like to ask you about some of the supports that you put in place for both your son and your daughter.
Okay, so I guess what I'm trying to do with my daughter, we're doing a lot more of having respite and having her actually go out of the house in respite and that sort of thing. With my son now, because he's nearly 21, what I do is I try from a very young age with him to give him the skills that he needs and support and psychology and all that sort of stuff. I have the conversations with him now and I give him the opportunity to be able to find within himself what he needs and learn to express that. Because away And I need to make sure that he has the understanding about himself and what he needs to be able to move forward. When he originally had his diagnosis, beforehand he said to me, Mama, can I ask you a question? Yes. Am I mentally ill? And it nearly broke me, Trudy. I was like, why are you asking me this, And he said, I don't understand why I get in trouble all the time and all this. And when he actually got his diagnosis, he went,
It makes sense. There's a reason why this is happening.
I try and help him, ask the questions and that sort of thing. So as he's older now, we don't have the formal supports like we used to anymore. But to try and help him understand why within himself and help him on that journey when he needs it.
Oh, fantastic. And I know with your daughter, you spoke about, when I've spoken to you in the past, you've spoken about some music therapy.
She does a music therapy, which is amazing. And it's probably a little bit technical, but it works with trying to reset the way that her mind has the brain waves and all that sort of thing. It sounds a bit woo-woo.
Yep.
There's scientific stuff behind it. Every time she goes, I do see benefits, and she doesn't regress, which can be sometimes unusual for a child with her level of autism.
Yeah.
They can learn skills and then lose them.
Yeah.
And she doesn't, and she's been going since she was 3, and she's about to turn 19. So I wouldn't keep sending her.
Oh, exactly.
And it's not as invasive or as intrusive as some of the other therapies that are out there.
Yeah.
She's got headphones, she listens, and she actually hears the music through bone conduction as well as auditory. So the processing, is like a double whammy.
Yep, and nice and soothing for her as well.
Well, they do. They use a lot of Mozart and Gregorian chant music, but the music is filtered at different frequencies that activates different parts of the brain.
Fantastic.
It's just amazing. I wish I could explain the A to Z of it, but as I said, I don't understand it scientifically totally.
Yep.
But the benefits I see are tangible.
Oh, fantastic.
Exactly.
So just on the last note, if you had some advice for other parents out there that are going through the process of cluster diagnosis or a dual diagnosis, what advice would you give them?
The biggest thing that I've seen, what holds people back, is some people don't want people to know. There's fear and sometimes shame and embarrassment. And I think that it puts them in a cocoon, and it doesn't allow them to go from a cocoon to a butterfly and be able to get the help and need and support. As I said, I've recently joined a fantastic group of empowering women, and it's in a group called Thrive, Tribe and Co.
Oh, awesome.
And they educate, they empower, and they're the most supportive, uplifting, and I have found so much more personal growth for myself. I thought I did a good job, but I know now that I needed to walk the walk and talk the talk more.
Yeah.
So the piece of advice that I would give people is reach out.
Yeah.
Reach out and ask for help. Reach out and ask for support. We can all help each other like a tribe does.
Yeah.
They say it takes a tribe to raise a family. Well, it takes a tribe of like-minded people, family members, to help us with our kids.
Yeah,
definitely. Kids or adult kids, it's no different really. That support system is invaluable. So reach out, ask for help, and don't have false pride. Take what you need and hold yourself up.
That's awesome advice. Totally agree with every part of it. And thank you for joining us today, Tania. And I agree with Tania on the side that, self-care for parents and loved ones of those with dual disabilities are so important. That is your core that will give you the strength. Thank you, Tania.
Thanks, Trudy.
%31% of children with autism also have a co-morbid diagnosis of an intellectual disability. Epilepsy is a seizure disorder, and more than 1/3 of those with autism also have epilepsy. 84% of children with autism are anxious and can have a diagnosis of anxiety. This can include both general anxiety disorder and social anxiety. 47% of people with autism are also diagnosed with having depression. Anywhere from 30% to 70% of children with autism also meet the criteria for ADHD, Attention Deficit Hyperactivity Disorder. More than 50% of children with autism are impacted by chronic sleep conditions. Schizophrenia affects between 4 to 35% of adults with autism, although childhood schizophrenia can be diagnosed between pre-teens and early teens. Both children and adults with autism are at an increased risk for bipolar disorder. Gastrointestinal disorders rank among the most common medical conditions associated with autism.
Welcome to Mike Unleashed. This time we're talking about misophonia. And what misophonia does is it makes you want to strangle someone who eats loudly around you. Now, I don't know about you, but it's very annoying. Yeah, it can be really annoying. So don't do it. Eat with your mouth shut and everyone will be happy. Cheers.
For this week's tip of the week, remember we set the standard for how our kids cope with situations. What we model, they will follow. And that's it for this week's show on the Aspie Whisperer. Thanks for joining us. Hope you liked it. I know I enjoyed making it. And don't forget to lick or click like and subscribe on all your favourite social media platforms. And join us for our next show where we talk about social situations and teenagers.